the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today NFL Wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. And Seth Cox, after a week off for family and fun and birthdays, he is back with me. Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. We're in episode 387. And Seth, the holiday weekend and your birthday didn't bring any good news for the Cardinals other than an almost win, but a lot of more crap, right?
Yeah, I mean, you start out and you're like, hey, one, you always think, it can't get worse, and I get that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are probably going to make the playoffs, but I mean, it definitely can get worse if you look at, Tampa Bay and Denver, and I know Denver beat Arizona last week, but there's some bad situations in the NFL, man, and the Cardinals situation this year has just been it's bad because a lot of it's just bad luck. I mean,
there has been a lot, like the injuries, so unfortunate. The Jeff Gladney, there has been a great deal of misfortune when it comes to this year.
Right, and they haven't even announced the Buda Baker on the injured reserve, but they put Aaron Brewer on the injured reserve, which makes 16 starters on injured reserve this year, which is again absurd. It's just been one of those situations where you look at it and again that game kind of a microcosm of the season, right? Like you get out to a decent start, your defense looks pretty good. You guys are playing at a high level, you're kind of clicking, and then you get up and you're like, oh, this is going well. Like, oh, okay, here we go. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh no, it's happening. And then it keeps spiraling, and then it ends with them not even be able to kick a field goal to try to win the game, even though they got the ball and had a chance, and then you end up in overtime and you win the toss in overtime, and you're like, hey, and then you get a first down, right? And you're like, oh, all right, they're not going to just go 3 and out and punt and lose. And no, they got one first down, and then they went 3 and out and punted and lost. And that's kind of how it goes, right? I mean, it's hard. Let's be honest. It's hard to win games when you have 325 total yards of offense, when you have 3 turnovers in the game, when you have 6 penalties, and when you go 5 for 19 on third down conversions. It's really hard to win games. So the fact that they were even in the position to win the game is impressive in and of itself. And I mean, let's be honest, Andy Lee was the best passer of the night, so that's always fun too.
Oh yeah. So obviously we've got the Cardinals 19-16 overtime loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Christmas that we're going to talk about, but that's not even what we're going to lead the show with, because oh boy, in this episode on Friday, actually before Cliff Kingsbury met with the media on Friday, which this is something that rarely happens. Now, the reason why this happened is because it wasn't a team thing, but rather a report from ESPN by both Jeremy Fowler and Josh Weinfuss, that we see these type of reports on big stories about other teams, and it's rarely about the Cardinals, but it covered pretty much everything when it came to Steve Keim, Cliff Kingsbury, Sean Kugler, and Kyler Murray. So we're gonna take a big chunk of the show to talk, kind of break things down. What do we think is real? What it means. And then we're going to go through and talk about other stuff. Like we're going to talk about the game, obviously. So we've got the good and the bad from the game. We're going to talk about J.J. Watt's retirement announcement, which he announced his retirement without saying the word retirement. This happened on Tuesday morning. We're going to talk about that, the good and the bad and the loss, and look ahead to their weekend game against the Atlanta Falcons, which feels like literally no one is excited about. We're just waiting for the end of the season, and that's how let's go. So we're going to go through the different parts of the ESPN report. We'll start with Keim, Kliff, and Kugler, and then we'll have a segment just on Kyler Murray. So let's start with that. The initial kind of thing, what they led with, and I thought it was actually the weakest part of the entire report, was the notion that Cliff Kingsbury might just walk away from the job, which I thought was weird. And then all of this was unnamed sources close to the situation. So there were people that are close to Cliff. There were people who were close to Kyler and close to this situation. And so we know this has been a horrible year. We know that it's been extremely stressful for Kingsbury. Kingsbury's a grinder, and that he's had to deal with a lot of BS. And we know that he does not have as much control as other coaches when it comes to decisions, whether that's by design, whether that's by what he wants. And so it does make things interesting, to say the least. But kind of the story was built around that. The notion, I think it was kind of where it says at the very, 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 very end of the story, maybe Cliff will just resign. A source close to Kingsbury speculated, tired of the BS. And
doesn't that seem more like projection from that person
yes.
than anything Cliff has
that,
said or done?
Yeah, that Cliff has told him, this is such a hard year. It's, and maybe it was maybe it was just kind of an aside comment. I'm going to just walk away from this crap. And it never was anything. I've never felt, because I will say this about Cliff. Like, he wants to be in the NFL. He doesn't want to go back to college. I mean, he doesn't want to go back to college because of all the stuff you have to deal with. But he's had to deal with BS this year, and people see just how stressed he is.
Have you ever seen those before and after photos of when a guy goes in the office for president and then comes out?
It's crazy.
I mean,
Cliff has aged so much this year.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel about Cliff, right? Like, and there's some things that like people don't know and don't get about Cliff, or don't care to know, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, this dude, when you talk about time put in, he puts in a lot of time. I mean, he's putting in 18, 19-hour days every day. That's just how he is.
Yeah.
He's a grinder. He's a film guy. He's, that's just how he is. And there are a lot of negatives we can get to about Cliff, and we'll get to them as we go through this whole thing. But I think the first thing that everybody needs to understand is that Cliff wants to succeed, and he puts in a lot of work to succeed.
I really love his philosophy, and he talked about it on Monday, is, these guys are pros. Kind of the best thing you can do as a leader is to show them you're working, be consistent in your message, have a plan. Don't look like it's random and you're just trying anything. Have a plan, and then don't be too high or too low. And I think he does a really good job of that.
Yeah, and he does, and he, like I said, he puts a lot of time and energy into those things, and trying to, and you said a lot of the things Cliff does or is asked to do, or is not asked to do, are different than a lot of other coaches, and I don't think a lot of people understand how that dynamic works. And so a couple of interesting aspects of this story that came out kind of play to what you and I have known for a while, and that's Cliff is basically the office manager. There is the corporate structure, and Cliff is the manager of that office. And Steve Keim's in charge of the personnel and all of that. and then Michael Bidwill oversees all of it. And Cliff's job is just to maintain the day to day and kind of prepare for the games and that stuff. But and so from that perspective, I can get where Cliff may have expressed like annoyance or I'm not even sure what the correct word or verbiage is for it, but being exacerbated by the fact that maybe he doesn't have as much say in what's going on as he wants, but he sure is the one that gets the blame for a lot of the failures, and that comes with the territory of being the man. And so when you look at it from that perspective, maybe that's how they get to that or jump to that conclusion. But there's nothing in the story or nothing in the idea that he's just going to walk away.
And that's absurd. Well, one, the money he would be walking away from was absurd. Like, why would he do that? Why would he not make the team fire him? But at the same time, if he were to do that, just how bad that would be the greatest indictment on this organization as on the whole, is if your coach, who has 5 years of security left, is willing to simply walk away than deal with the nonsense. Who's going to come here to replace him?
Yeah, and so that's the thing. So that's the first thing, and then you get into the Keim situation. So you look at the Cliff situation, and you look at a guy that doesn't have a ton of say in personnel, coaching personnel, all player personnel, those type of things. And then, but the guy that does, based on this report, hasn't been around a lot.
That's the other part. According to this report, that Keim's presence has been less noticed. Like, he has not been in the building. It says, multiple sources said Keim had a far less of a presence in the building in 2022 than in years past, making it challenging for head coach and general manager to coalesce on personnel matters. This makes a lot of sense. I don't know why it's happening, whatever the reason is, and it did say that that the relationship between Bidwill and Keim. Now, we've seen that, we've known that the two are close. The two have a close relationship personally. But that professional relationship, and even in Hard Knocks, starting mid-season, you could see them buddy there in the owner's box in games. But it does say that the relationship is souring a little bit, and maybe it has to do with he's got this health-related leave of absence, and there's no guarantees coming back. I've always kind of suggested that this is not necessarily something about his actual health or an illness or an infection that is debilitating that's keeping him out of the office, but rather things about he's doing in his life that are affecting his health and his performance on the job. And maybe that's what the case is. He's not in the office as much, and the fact, because if this were simply an illness, it would be a really weird situation to just fire him, right?
Yeah,
and that's what they're suggesting is going to happen.
Yeah, and so that's what makes it interesting. And like you said, there's the reality that they've had like you said, that Keim and Bidwill had a close relationship. We know that there are two sides to the story, but one thing that we know for certain is that Michael Bidwill is not a guy that has a family or is married, and that is, and he enjoys his financial and freedom, as well as the freedom of not having a family. And so that doesn't always work when the other side, which in this case was Steve Keim, does have that. And so that's, again, just speculating or going off of what we know, but that could be something where there might be maybe they're not as close now. And like you said, maybe it's because of something as simple as like Keim being like, I've got other priorities, not just football. And so, that's and don't get me wrong. I mean, in reality, there's nothing wrong with, Michael Bidwell, how he lives his life or spends his money. He doesn't have to answer to anybody. He doesn't have a family that he needs to answer to or anything like that. So, that's fine for him. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's, a situation where you would hope that they would be able to separate their work and personal relationship if that was needed to. But like you said, the timing and all of that is an oddity. And the fact that, like you said, they just didn't let him go speaks to that there's something, right? Like, obviously that there's something, whether it's that friendship that they're not going to just outright fire him, and they're letting him kind of, maybe play the personal health card, and then they're gonna, say, oh, for the betterment of his health or whatever, he's gonna step away and yada yada yada. So, there's a lot to this whole thing. But going back to Kliff, it makes it really hard for a coach, right, to make personnel decisions, make coaching decisions, when the guy that inevitably is the one that says yes or no to all of those decisions is not around. And again, that played out very interestingly in the article.
Yeah, the other part that's kind of interesting in this is, well, a couple of comments that were suggested is that they're not built to run Kliff's offense, and I you can't say in this case that the Cardinals didn't go out and load up this offense, because they did. They have Hopkins, they got Marquise Brown, they drafted Rondell Moore, they drafted Trey McBride, they extended James Conner, they extended Zach Ertz. They extended DJ Humphreys. They brought back, encouraged Rodney Hudson to come back. They signed Will Hernandez. So they've done that. The problem is the health. Now, the one thing that I felt was interesting is the whole the Sean Kugler aspect to it, who was let go after allegedly groping a woman in Mexico City. He's filing arbitration for wrongful termination for cause. That said, the interesting part of that is that supposedly Kliff had wanted to fire Kugler at some point during the season and was told no, because the team didn't want to pay the buyout that there was. And it's very interesting that his role in game planning and in the offense had been reduced. And this is a fact. This is fascinating to me, because I wonder what happened. If this all is true, what happened? Because this is a guy that Kliff has been very, very complimentary to in Kugler over the last 3 seasons, and then they gave him a promotion and a raise to coordinator, and to now push him out of the game preparation means there's been something going on, either football related or otherwise, that would lead Kliff to do that and want to get rid of him. Doesn't it seem that way?
Yeah, and you go back to it with the not being able to run the offense. I think a lot of it stems from they've spent more time looking at addressing the skill positions rather than the offensive line that's really needed to run what they want to run. And you wonder if there was a power struggle or if it was just and we don't know, obviously. Was Kugler the one that pushed to re-sign James Conner? And and again, we go back to when Kliff doesn't have a lot of say, in personnel decisions, and you're trying to acquiesce by saying, oh, well, we got you this guy, but like, is that the guy that fits best for what they want to do? You know what I'm saying?
I just had a thought. This literally just came to me. I wonder if Kugler was behind, over the last couple of seasons, the whole splitting, like Connor plus Eno plus everything else in the run game. Because there was a very distinct time late this season where Kingsbury simply said it was time to give Connor the role of the starting runner back. And guess what? Connor has been fantastic in that role since that happened. It also aligns with the weird Eno Benjamin dismissal, cutting and everything. I wonder if that is all related philosophically for what Kugler was doing, and maybe Kliff had just been fed up with, because Kliff has always been, up until last year, kind of a one-horse guy with running back, dating back to college. Is that not correct? He's been a one-horse guy pretty much most of his coaching career.
Yeah, and so you just look at it, like you said, you've got them, making a lot of, and early in his career here, it was a necessity due to injuries. But for the most part, like you said, he tends to ride a running back and use him, and because what it does is it allows you to be able to run or pass out of any situation. And so, with Connor getting the bulk of the touches again, they're back to that offensive scheme, and it does open things up a little bit more for them. I just, it's one of those situations, and I don't think people understand how tough it is, and there is a balance, right? So, you had the Ken Wisenhunt situation where he had total personnel control, and
he got his extension and got final roster decision,
and it really cost him his job. Then you had BA, who was basically the voice in the room at the time, and then now there's more coming out that maybe he wanted that same level of say in roster decision making at the end, and there was potentially a power struggle between he and Keim. I don't know. I mean, because didn't he always kind of say Keim was like his little brother to him? So
well,
I don't know.
And they always talked about staying in their lane, and so it'd be interesting if that were the case. But we have seen since Aaron's left that the dynamic has been always that this is Keim's team. Bidwell put it on Keim to build the roster. When Steve Wilkes, the situation failed, he said, "I trust Steve Keim to do that," and so that all the power has been in his hands. But coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Best Hour Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's talk more about this story, but more on the side of Kyler Murray and Kliff Kingsbury in that way. So that's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web. This ESPN report, so many different levels to it, but it also reveals some things supposedly about Kyler Murray. And at least the one thing I will say about this, it didn't talk about leadership, it didn't talk about video games or studying, but it did talk about negativity. Now, I kind of want to allude to the Kliff Kingsbury situation. One of the greatest things that we've noticed about him, and I think that endears himself to players, is the fact that he does not criticize, he doesn't call out individual players publicly. The problem is he apparently does not do that in front of the team either. So when you had BA had an accountability board, a mental error board, where they go, okay, there was this F up here, this was messed up, and put it in front of it because of an accountability board. Kliff doesn't do that. He always talks in collective terms. We need to be better. And sure, maybe he's bringing guys into the office and telling them specifically, but it named a longtime former player who said that, it's hard for a teammate or an offensive guard to call out a guy who's messing up when the coach isn't doing it. When philosophically, Kliff is talking philosophically or collectively about the team doing better, and he expects the leadership to then hold players accountable for that, which is an interesting notion. But this is the part. So that's probably one of the weaker part of Kingsbury's thing. He's a player's coach, and he's not going to call you out. So he's not going to embarrass players in front of other players. But that affects accountability, and that leads us to Kyler Murray, where he doesn't call out Murray's. They've had communication, but the relationship between the two, which has been a good relationship since Kyler was a teenager, is not good. And not because of it, they simply are not communicating enough. Kingsbury isn't holding him accountable enough for his mistakes. He's frustrated about things, and they're cordial, but then there's just something missing. And I think this is when they were talking about leading up to the Chargers game when he was injured. The report came out by Ian Rappaport that they had kind of a sit down and they kind of cleared the air about what expectations were and kind of what the goals were for the rest of the season. And then the report says that the very next week after the Chargers game, Kyler was late to practice. Something that's interesting because we didn't hear about. And my theory with the Kyler Murray situation, if there's anything that we can say about Kyler and Kliff Kingsbury, that perhaps Kingsbury is not going to get enough out of Kyler, is because Kliff doesn't coach hard enough. And because he is completely enamored with Kyler Murray's skill set and his ability as a quarterback, he basically worships him. He's glad to have him on his team. He calls God's gift to the team. That he isn't willing to push him hard. And I believe Kyler Murray, with the competitor that he is, would respond very well to hard coaching. I think he would thrive in a situation like that, but Kingsbury simply, it's not in his personality to do it.
Well, I think you have some situations too where, it's a really hard situation when the players start to lose respect for the coach, and not for the man, but for when you look at the fact that, like you said, Kliff expects accountability. And the reality is there's a lot of these guys who, quite frankly, prey and take advantage of the fact that they're not going to get called out, that they aren't, to your point, coached hard. And that plays into what we've seen the last couple of months, where guys are playing selfishly as opposed to for one another. And a lot of times that players coaches mentality works until it doesn't. And I know that's silly to say, but what I mean by that is it's really easy when you're front running that everybody's taking accountability, right? But like when things get hard, who's the leader that steps up? You combine that with the fact that, like you said, Kliff's not a leader in that sense, right? Like he's not gonna dog or get on anybody.
Like any interaction we've ever seen, for example, like on Hard Knocks, you see him being very, like Trace McSorley. You show him on the sideline, he's okay. You've got this. He's very encouraging. He's just trying to get guys to do and to not be down, essentially.
Right.
Like you messed up. Okay, get this. Let's fix this up. Do this. You got this. He's encouraging. He's like, it's good to see.
And that's why I said when the only true like alpha leader is the owner, it becomes an issue. And that's where it's at now, because your GM's gone. He's not, he hasn't been part of the team apparently, or it hasn't been around much of the team. You've got guys like JJ Watt, who's, a good guy, but, and respected. And it's not that people don't respect him, but, he's a 33-year-old veteran. You've got, a Kelvin Beachum, he's a 32-year-old veteran, but like they're not in your face type of guys. The Buda Baker speech on Hard Knocks, I don't know how other people felt about it, but like to me, it was almost like it was manufactured. Like they needed to have Buda say that stuff, and it wasn't who Buda truly is as a player. And I think one of the other players or one of his ex teammates actually tweeted about that. Like, that's not who Buda is. Like, that's not his style. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you don't need Tom Brady or Peyton Manning who's going to, yell and scream at you. But if the players aren't going to hold each other accountable, then the coach has to. And that's kind of where I think the wheels have come off this whole thing, is that the accountability to anybody is missing. And like these guys aren't being held accountable to each other, or they don't feel like they need to be accountable to each other. And instead it's just become this kind of locker room where everybody's kind of on their own and doing their thing. And that's where it's at. And that's just what it feels like. And, you're seeing that kind of play out on the field where they make a lot of silly errors, mental and mental mistakes where they're undisciplined and things like that, because, like you said, unfortunately, there's no consequences for those mistakes. Like You're not benched, you're not pulled. There's no demonstrative things. And then when you do get that from your quarterback, everybody wants to make it a big deal that, like, look how disrespectful he is to the head coach. Well, like, you can't have your cake and eat it too, man. Like, if you want somebody to try to be accountable for the team and like try to demand more out of the team, then you can't get mad when he's trying to do it as a 24, 25-year-old guy that's trying to get more out of the team because he doesn't think the coach is doing enough. And that, to me, is where things have gotten the most kind of toxic.
Yeah, and that's the other part, is that the negativity. Before Kingsbury's injury, Kingsbury was described as extremely frustrated with starting quarterback, with Murray, per a team source, believing that his negativity, if not toxic, was starting to get to people around the building. And so he's calling out guys. He's being negative. He's being more demonstrative. And that's one of the – there's been two instances when Kingsbury has kind of called out something. One was the A.J. Green turnaround. And it was – he basically said it was the right call. It was the right play. There was a miscommunication, but basically that AJ didn't know what was supposed to happen on that game in against Green Bay, rather. And then the other one is talking about
and that's balance. Where it all went downhill.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. And then recently on a mention of, there's a balance that a quarterback has to have about, hands up, demonstrative type things, and bring a guy to the sideline. And maybe that's kind of the negativity that Kingsbury wants to avoid. He wants things positive. He doesn't want it to be toxic for the teammates, and it's starting to get to people. I get that. And I think most of that is because it's combined with losing games. Because if that's happening and they're winning sometimes, I don't think it'd be a problem at all. But the reason why it's getting toxic and it's getting to people is because nobody is happy and it's not working.
No, and that's the thing, is you've got I mean, let's just be honest. You have a quarterback that's not used to losing, that doesn't like losing, but he's also not the guy. Like I said, he's not that rah. It's all like,
he's a get your butt in your guy. Let's do this right.
Right. He's the guy that expects everybody to be working as hard as he is, and when they're not, and then on top of that, your coach isn't calling things out, and it just becomes, like I said, just becomes too much. And there's a fine line between Cliff and like a guy that who I guess we could say BA. Like there's a happy medium between the two.
Yeah, with BA, you heard him cussing out players all practice, all the time.
Right. And so that's the thing is like there is that happy medium, but at the same time, the players have to own that as well. And it just seems like right now the players are not willing to own that. They're doing it individually, and like I would never say anything negative about JJ Watt. He's one of the greatest players ever, but like Watt's a perfect example. The dude's playing out of his mind, and the defense had a very good game against Tampa Bay, so I don't want to take anything away from that, but like it's not changing the mentality or the prospects of this organization. It's JJ Watt's playing extremely well. You get what I'm saying? So like it's not feeding into the rest of the team. And typically when you allow the players to have that ebb and flow, that's what you need to happen. And for the Cardinals, there's just been no coming back up from that downturn of Green Bay last year, where and who knows if it was something in the locker room, outside of the locker room, who knows what it was, but like where they just haven't really looked the same since.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Special of Cardinals Talk a little bit. We're going to talk about JJ Watt and his surprising retirement announcement. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Special of Cardinals Talk on the web. I awoke this morning. I got to sleep in right now because I don't have to go to my other job. And one of the first things I saw, JJ Watt. A nice JJ Watt post on Twitter talking about he's got a photo with his wife and his baby boy, Koa, and how it is his first NFL game, and then he said his last ever NFL home game, and how blessed, and we're like, whoa. You think about like, oh, that's a great photo. Wait. He just announced his retirement. That was a little bit shocking. I'm not surprised he's retiring, but I'm kind of shocked. I'm kind of surprised because to me, the way he's been playing, he's playing some of the best football of the 2 years that he's been here, and is coming at the end of the season. It felt like a showcase to try and get at least another deal with the team to win and get another contract. Apparently, it is knowing the end is in sight and pushing to that end. But wow, JJ Watt announcing his retirement, controlling the narrative once again about his news. He didn't, when the Cardinals signed him, he announced it. And like national media, no one knew. No one even had the Cardinals on their radar. He knew it was going to break, and so he talked about his health condition, his heart condition earlier this year. And before it comes out, he is the one that gets to announce that he's retiring after the season. I mean, good on him. 12 seasons in the NFL. He's going to be a Hall of Famer, clearly. And he's playing some of the best football of his last few seasons. But were you surprised by it?
I mean, I'm surprised because, like you said, he's playing the best of his career. But maybe, and let's just hope that, knock on wood, don't jinx anything, maybe he wants to be able to walk off the field. You get what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
he doesn't want to end his career on IR or anything like that. So you look at it, and he's at a point where even if he was injured in one of the last two games, he has 9.5 sacks. He has 14 tackles for loss. You go back over his last 5 seasons. This is his best year since 2018 when he was an All-Pro, and he had 16 sacks, and 14 or 18 tackles for loss. So like he was the second on the comeback player of the year. He was an AP, All-Pro. He was a Pro Bowler again. After that, he's got 4 sacks, 5 sacks, and 1 sack. Like 9.5 sacks. He's almost matched his total over the last, the previous 4 seasons. 14 tackles for loss. Like he's playing at a level that he hasn't played at in 5 years. And maybe that's just what he wanted. He wanted one more chance opportunity to end on a high note and kind of be great one last time.
Yeah, and honestly, it makes sense. Like in his stage in his career, he's 32 years old, 33 years old. Can't remember which one.
33, yeah.
He's 33 years old. He just had a baby, and he had a health scare with his heart.
Right. And he'll be 34 in March. So it's not like he just turned 33. Like
it's a good time to walk away. The only thing that is a disappointment is that it's been such an awful, awful season for the Cardinals, because kind of the hope was getting a guy like J.J. Watt would push them over the top. He'd had the not only the play on the field, but the presence in the locker room to take them to the next level, and he didn't do it. It's not his fault, but he wasn't able to accomplish that.
Well, and unfortunately for Watt, that's going to kind of be the story of his career. I mean, you're talking about perhaps the greatest 4-year stretch of play in NFL history from a pass rusher. I mean, he literally had in 4 seasons, he had 69 sacks, 100, and this is in 64 games, 69 sacks, 119 tackles for loss, 190 quarterback hits. He finished with 15 forced fumbles, and 41 passes defensed in 4 seasons. That's 4 seasons. That's a career for most people. He did that from 2012 to 2015. There's a reason he won 3 Defensive Players of the Year. He finished in 2014. He finished second on the MVP list, not defensive. He was second in MVP voting in 2014. And here's the deal. In 2011, he was a rookie. They went 10-6. In 2012, his first Defensive Player of the Year season, they went 12-4. They went 2-14 the very next season. And he was, again, Defensive Player of the Year when he was, in his 3rd year in the league. You're talking about a guy that put up, 10.5 sacks and 22 tackles for loss. And they went 2-14. Like, they had a guy in Watt who's just an absurd, unique, once in a generation type of guy. Those 4 seasons in a row will never be replicated. And the reason I say they'll never be replicated isn't just because of like the sack numbers. Like, I'm sure Nick Bosa is probably going to get close to 69 sacks in 4 seasons. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still a lot, but like, when you look at everything he did in that 4-year span, and remember, there are 4 years in a row, like, it's 10 more sacks than what Aaron Donald had in his 4 seasons in a row, best 4 seasons in a row. It's 33 more passes defensed in that time. 33. Like, what he did in that 4-season run is just literally the most unfathomable thing that we've ever seen from a defensive player. And so I think for him, I think he came here with the idea that he would be able to compete and potentially, win a championship. That obviously went out the window pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But I think for him, it's been the ability to show that flash one more time. Yeah, he's not 2014 J.J. Watt. I mean, he's 8 years older. That's not shocking. But the fact that he is, this is his 6th highest sack total in his career outside of his 5 All-Pro seasons. The fact that his tackles for loss, is the 6th highest. His quarterback hits 6th highest. Like, this is literally his best season outside of his 5 All-Pro seasons. And I know you're like, well, duh, it's not as good as his All-Pro seasons. But think about that. A 33-year-old that had the greatest 4-year stretch in NFL history for a defensive player is now putting up similar numbers.
Pro Bowl numbers. They're Pro Bowl numbers. He
Right.
had he not been listed as a defensive end and as a defensive interior guy, a DT, you could argue that he probably deserves to be a Pro Bowler.
Right. And so it's just, it's unfortunate that this is how it had to end for the team. But for him personally, I think that's why he's retiring. I don't know for a fact, and I definitely could be wrong, but I would be willing to bet if he had a similar outcome to last year where he, missed the final 9 games, I would bet he would have come back for one more year, because from a pride standpoint, he wants to walk off being the Watt that everybody remembers, and he's putting on that, kind of classic season again. I mean, think about this, man. This guy hasn't had double-digit sacks in 5 seasons.
And he's on the verge. Half a sack in the last 2 weeks, and then he'll get that.
And before that, I mean, 16 sacks is a lot, so I don't want anybody to. But think about this. The last time before that was 2015. So, he has 1 double-digit sack since 2015. That's 8 years since he's, he in the last 8 seasons, he just has 1. So, this is, I think, for him, just the reality that he's able to still compete, and he's feeling like he's walking away, maybe, obviously not at the height of his powers, but definitely at where he feels incredibly confident in his game still.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on to the game against the Buccaneers, the good and the bad of the game. What's coming up next on Rise Up See Red? We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals lose in overtime, 19-16. It was a tough game to watch, but a game in which the Cardinals didn't play poorly. Ultimately, it wasn't enough, and the entire second half, I was waiting for Tampa to come back and do what Denver did. I thought it was going to be Denver 2.0.
Yeah, we were just waiting for the implosion.
And it didn't happen. They battled. Again, what we got to see was a team that played hard. They were bad offensively, but both teams were bad offensively. But the defense held up longer. They held up longer. So there were things to like. Trace McSorley definitely wasn't good, but he wasn't terrible, which was nice to see. And he was a couple plays away from they had to take away the sack fumble that he had, which would have probably put another 3 points on the board. The Cardinals were in a position to beat Tom Brady and the Bucs, a team that's leading the NFC South, even though and playing for and fighting for their playoff lives. So, what were the biggest positives for you that came out of that game?
I mean, we talked about Watt already. I don't want to go too much longer, but he continues at a very high level, which is, again, for his age and injury history, is just an absurd thing that he's still playing like that. He's, it's just been fun to watch, to be quite honest. It sucks that it comes in this type of situation, but it's been fun to watch. Cameron Thomas, man, I mean, he's the reason that Marco Wilson got his first interception. He continues to grow. He only had 34 snaps, so he's doing it in limited situations. I mean, he had 3 less snaps and 7 less pass rush snaps than fellow rookie Myjai Sanders. And and it's not that Myjai looked bad, but I just felt like Cameron Thomas looked better in those situations. I thought, those were 2 things that really stood out initially. I thought that we're seeing some maturation in what Isaiah Simmons gives you. I thought that was his best game as a cover guy. Excuse me. Sorry. And then obviously on defense, what can you say about Marco Wilson? I mean, his best game as a pro, 2 interceptions. It's good to see him continue to grow in a season that's basically been lost to injury for a number of players that we were hoping to see a little more from, right? Like we wanted to see a little more. And so to see him just continue to play well is huge. Offensively, I really like what we've been seeing from James Conner and Greg Dortch.
Well, that's the thing with Conner is that what's been good is his not only the yards, but it's the yards per carry. Because even last year, his Pro Bowl year, he was, what is he, like 3.7 yards per carry? He was a volume guy, but that got in the end zone. And he struggled earlier on, but now we're seeing some explosiveness. We're seeing some big plays.
And I'm still convinced he was hurt. Like
yeah, it's got to be. It's got to be the case.
There's no other explanation for it. Because, I mean, he's over 4 yards per carry this season. But to your point,
and that was after half a season of being nearly at 3.
Right. I was going to say, you look at it after there's what I'm looking for. After the San Francisco game, 4.8, 5.7. He was only at 3.94 last week, but that Denver defense isn't bad. And then he was again over 5. So like the last 3 of the last 4 games, he's ran extremely hard and extremely well. And then Dortch, you can't say enough about this guy. And it goes back to something that you and I have talked about, and maybe, and again, it doesn't excuse by any stretch of the imagination if Kyler is having like a negative effect on the locker room. But you look at Dortch, and you look at a guy like Greg Dortch, who undrafted, battled his butt off. And then you go back to last year's draft, and they took Rondale Moore, somebody you and I liked, but we had one glaring question about Rondale Moore, right, coming out of Purdue, and that was, can he stay healthy? And so far in his career, the answer is no. And it's not a shot at Rondale; it's just a reality. And allegedly behind the scenes, Kyler was, and he likes Rondale, and he wanted Rondale, but allegedly behind the scenes, Kyler was pushing pretty hard for Creed Humphrey to be the guy. And you pick Rondale, and obviously when Rondale's on the field, he is a difference maker. He's a fantastic player, but he's a guy that's really struggled to stay on the field. And meanwhile, you got a guy like Dortch, who is probably closer to 90% of the player that Rondale is. Maybe he's not quite as explosive athletically, but availability, his availability makes up for the 10% difference,
and
right?
He seems to always make plays, but it's interesting when we ask him, okay, why isn't Dortch playing? And I even asked him, do you lament not getting Dortch more playing time earlier? Because it seems like every time he's been given more than just a bit role, he produces. And apparently it's Dortch hasn't quite earned it. Like, he's a gamer, but there's still a lot that he's inconsistent about when he practices, about alignments and depth of routes and things like that. But then when he has the opportunity, he's just making plays, and he was locked in. His technique was really good. His assignments were really good. It'd be interesting to see if that's something that can carry over toward next year, because we saw some flashes from Antoine Wesley last year, and you could tell that the team was counting on him coming into this year, and he just got hurt. Will they count on Dortch a year from now? This is what I'm interested in seeing, is if they will then trust him even more to perhaps be that, even split time with Rondale, play Rondale more outside next season.
Yeah. And they've got some decisions to make that we'll address later. And then the last guy I think, I want to bring up, and it's partially self-congratulatory, and it's partially just, I love seeing guys kind of hit their, or reach their talent ability, and that's Josh Jones. Quietly, Josh Jones is the best offensive lineman on the Arizona Cardinals this year. And that includes even when everybody's healthy. You look at what he's done as a pass protector, you look at what he's doing in the run game, like he's becoming a very good left tackle in this league. And so that's going to bring up some questions about what they do with DJ Humphries this offseason. But I thought the fact that they kept, what's his name, for the other team, the pass rusher, I can't remember his name, the younger pass rusher though, that they kept him on Kelvin Beacham's side the whole game was kind of telling, because I don't want to say he's to that level yet, but Josh Jones is kind of becoming a guy that you don't line up your best pass rusher against because he's playing that well. Joe Tryon Shoyinka is the guy I was trying to remember his name.
Yes.
And he had a huge game coming off the offensive right, the defensive left against Beach. But I mean, and I know their other top pass rushers been out for the season, but the other guys that they brought, Anthony Nelson, who was the other guy that they tried to pass rush with, couldn't really do anything against Josh Jones. And that's pretty cool to see, man, to see him continue to grow and develop in that way.
Bad things. The offense is bad. The offense is so bad.
Yeah,
I mean, 3 touchdowns since Kyler got hurt. They don't have a single passing touchdown. They're bad on third down. It's been a mess. And then we know the defense, they can't sustain a full game, and so unless you get them, if you can get them more than a score up and then continue to add points so that there is room for error, there's margin for error, the defense just can't do it. And ultimately I waited the entire second half for it to happen, and then it just happened at the very end of the game where they scored the touchdown, where they tied the game, and then in overtime when they got the game-winning kick. Ultimately you knew it was all coming. Though I will say this, we're at the point in the season where this is kind of the best case scenario, where you see a team fight, battle, play well enough to win but actually lose in a season where draft status might be the better outcome.
Right. And especially in a draft where, now obviously they're losing JJ Watt. So you look at it, when they're, in a draft where there are 2 dominant interior defensive linemen, there's a Von Miller, like pass rusher. And then there's great offensive line prospects. Like, having the 4th pick is not a bad thing, because, or 3rd pick is not a bad thing, because if you can get there, all of a sudden you have more options. So, and I'm not saying the 7th pick would have been bad. I think that's where they would have ended up if they would have won that game. Actually, probably the 9th, because these freaking strength of schedule thing, man, it's killing the Cardinals. But, it's just really interesting that it, like you said, it kind of worked out that. And that's, I think, the hardest thing for me. And I want to get your opinion on this, because you mentioned it. They're playing hard.
It's really good to see, and I think that's one of the best things you can say about this team, is that it's not like the 2012 season where they just fell apart. And in fairness, that could happen in the last 2 weeks of the season, especially against San Francisco in the final game of the year. But
they're playing hard. They're
playing hard. They're still playing for Kliff, and that might be one of the things that keeps him employed.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that enough to? Because that's the thing, is like, typically, I mean, we saw it with Denver. Like, typically, you see these guys check out, and that's just not happening. So, I mean, I get moving on, but at the same time, it's like, if these guys are still fighting for him, I don't know. Obviously, these are discussions we'll have in a couple weeks, maybe.
Yes.
I mean, who knows? Maybe on that Monday we won't even have to worry about it, and we'll just talk about it on Tuesday's show. But
we'll be talking about coaching candidates.
Right. It's just tough, man. Because it'd be a lot easier to move on for Kliff if if they weren't playing so hard.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's wrap this up talking about their Week 17 game on the road against the Atlanta Falcons. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise of See Red podcast, best our Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals play the Atlanta Falcons, a team that is in as much disarray as the Cardinals right now. The Cardinals have lost their last 5 games and 7 of their last 8. The Falcons have lost 4 in a row and 6 of their last 7. They moved on from Marcus Mariota, who is their starting quarterback, and then he, left the team. So they've turned things over to Desmond Ridder. He's not looked good. No touchdowns, no interceptions. They do have an incredible rushing attack.
Super incredible, man.
But outside of that, they
bad.
play close, low-scoring games. Their last 4 games, they've lost 19-13, 19-16, 21-18, and 17-9. So they're not producing offensively, but their defense is playing okay. And partially it's because they're able to slow the game down. This is a game the Cardinals might F around and win. And while we want to see the Cardinals win, at this point of the season, it would be better if they don't win. This is a game where James Conner could have a big game. If Colt McCoy's, if they're playing on schedule, this is one of those games that they could win because their rush defense is also as bad as their rushing offense is. These are the last 7 games for them. They've given up 169, 91, 232, 160, 176, 154, 134, and 184. That's bad.
So what you're saying is we're going to see an old school Army-Navy game?
Yes. Colt McCoy against Desmond Ridder, but really it's going to be James Conner against Tyler Algier.
Yeah, and Cordarrelle Patterson. We can't forget about Cordarrelle. He's been hitting, that's the thing is this team, they were 5-8. They went into the bye. They made the switch that they needed to make to see what they had in Desmond Ridder for 4 games. It's too early to say that Ridder's not the guy, but like you said, he hasn't been the guy yet. I heard people clamoring for Marcus Mariota for the Cardinals. You want to talk about a bad teammate.
It's a bad look.
There's not really much else you can say outside of that. He's not a great quarterback in any way, but then to just leave the team because they're trying to evaluate the second round, third round quarterback they drafted on a 5-8 team, like as a bad luck, man. They haven't utilized what we expected them to be able to. Drake London's had a really nice, I wouldn't say, good, or I wouldn't say great, but a really nice rookie season, despite having to catch passes from, 2 guys that hover right around 60% completion percentage. He's got 61 receptions for just under 700 yards and 4 touchdowns. Kyle Pitts is just criminally underutilized, 28 receptions at 356 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's after, in his rookie season, having 68 receptions for over 1,000 yards, and making the Pro Bowl. Like, this dude is putting up like Max Williams like numbers, and that's not a shot at Max, man, like at all.
Now, Kyle Pitts is supposed to be more like Kittle and Kelsey.
Yeah, like you're talking about a guy that was drafted 4th overall. Like, if he's not putting up 1,100 plus yards every season, that's a bad pick. So they've got the weapons in London and Pitts, and man, they are matchup nightmares for everybody. They just, for whatever reason, can't find them. And the reason I say they're matchup nightmares for everybody is you got to remember, London, Pitts is 6'6", 250 and runs, in the high 4.4s. Drake London's 6'5" and 210, and runs in the 4.4s. Like, these are just legitimate freaks. And London's been heating up the last 3 weeks. He had an injury in college that he missed a bunch of time for. He came in, kind of had a couple little good games, but the last 3 weeks, man, 6 for 95, 7 for 70, and 7 for 96. Like, he's starting to put it together, which should make us nervous because no Byron Murphy. Obviously, we talked about how good Marco Wilson played last week,
but he's day-to-day, might not play.
Right.
They got Antonio Hamilton's having an okay year. They brought back Josh Jackson. Who?
Oh, and we didn't even talk about Buddha.
Oh, that's right. Buddha Baker.
We
lament the Buddha. He played the entire freaking game and fractured his shoulder, and now
he's done for the year.
He's done for the year.
Why haven't they put him on IR yet?
They'll wait. They'll wait to see what other roster moves they need to make.
Okay.
I mean, for crying out loud, they kept Zach Ertz on the roster for like 2 extra weeks.
I know
they don't make any sense to me.
Yeah, but so that's the thing. So Pitts and London, they're matchup nightmares, man. They straight up are. And like you said, the craziest thing is, so these guys are matchup nightmares, like legitimate, just tough to guard. And then they got 2 guys averaging 5 yards a carry, and Tyler Algier and Cordarrelle Patterson. And this team sucks. Like, it just makes no sense. Like, you have one of the best rushing attacks in all of the NFL. You have 2 guys averaging 5 yards a carry. You've got this awesome thunder lightning package. Algiers, you and I loved Algier coming out, out of BYU. Man, that dude he ran like that. There was just anger behind his runs. And then Cordarrelle Patterson is just such a freak of nature as a runner, so hard to tackle. The NFL leader in NFL history that has more kickoff returns for touchdowns than anybody else. Like, he's a member of the all 2010s team because that's how dominant of a kick returner he is. And then a team finally figured out to use him at running back, and he's like, oh yeah, I can do this too. He's a freak. But their quarterback situation is just so bad. Defensively, you talked about it. They're just not very good. Grady Jarrett, I was really actually surprised he didn't move on when he had the chance. He's got 6 sacks. He's going to cause some problems on the interior. That's what he does, man. He's a good ball player, but
double him and run the ball with Connor, and you probably have yourself. But do you think the Cardinals win this game? They play better on the road, and Atlanta plays well at home.
I just don't see. I mean, I think they have a better chance with Colt McCoy. I just don't think they can stop the Falcons' rushing attack, man. Like, their rushing attack is really, really good.
And is Zach Allen's not playing this week? It's going to be their defensive. It's going to be tough. I mean,
and that's the thing is,
but it'll be an ugly game. I don't think it'll be a blowout. I think it'll be a very It'll be a muck. It'll be slow and gross.
It'll be like 17-13 or 20-14 type of game.
Well, and that's the thing, because the Cardinals offense can't do anything.
Well, and here's something else we didn't talk about, and I meant to. I had it in my notes, and we're moving along. I forgot to mention a guy that struggled the last couple of weeks is Zaven Collins, and he just hasn't played as well as he was in that middle of the season where it looked like everything was starting to click. And so in a game like this where we know Isaiah Simmons' strength is not, playing the run, where Zaven may have to make, and I'm not exaggerating, 20 tackles in a game where they're running the ball so much, he's got to step up and play better than he has the last couple of weeks, or this could be a really big problem. But like you said, their rush defense is so bad. I don't know, man. This is just such a toss up, because you look at it, you're talking about really close, in terms of 20.5 points per game for the Cardinals, 21 points a game for the Falcons. You're talking about 26 points a game allowed for the Cardinals, 23 points a game for the Falcons, -2 takeaway differential for the Cardinals, -3 for the Falcons. You're talking, 31st in passing yards per game for the Falcons, 31st, but 3rd in rushing.
Yeah.
They average more yards running in a game than they do passing.
That's terrible. Prediction time. I think the Cardinals, I think they lose this one. I think we're going to continue to see the wheels fall out, and I think it'll be a 20-16 Falcons win.
Yeah, I was going to go 20-14. So I think that's, I think it's right there. So 14 Falcons. It's a no good, ugly game, and
and we got to watch it, and we got to watch it, and we got to write about it, and then we got to talk about it. But hey, we're not complaining, guys.
At least you won't have to be at the stadium extra long on Christmas
true.
Again.
Overtime on Christmas night. It was a joy. Anyway, that wraps up this edition of the Rise Up Secret podcast, special of Cardinals Talk on the Web. It's episode 387. We will be back next week talking with the new year. Who knows? Maybe the Cardinals win. I doubt it, but we'll talk to you then. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise up, See Red.